Elite.com. It is Monday, October 2nd, 2017, which means not only that we are in Halloween season, but then the National Wrestling Alliance officially has a new owner in former TNA president and Smashing Pumpkins frontman Billy Corgan, who now owns Lock, Stock, and Barrel, the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, all the associated trademarks, and all the associated championships. We broke the story when Corgan first began the purchasing process, and we followed the roller coaster that has gone along with this story in recent weeks and months, and now, officially, he is now the owner. But what the hell does this mean? What does it mean for the NWA, for its legacy, for its future, and for any of the trademarks and copyrights and associated intellectual property that goes along with a brand that at one point was the predominant wrestling brand before anybody knew what the hell World Wrestling Entertainment was? Well, we have someone on the line who is going to be very instrumental in the future of the National Wrestling Alliance's direction. Dave Lagana, former WWE and Impact Wrestling creative personality who left Impact when Anthem Media took that company over to go work with Billy Corgan. And obviously, now that Corgan owns a wrestling company, having someone that's worked in the trenches of a lot of major wrestling companies is a good person to have on your side. So, Dave, we've had you on before in the past. Thank you for coming back on. Interesting time period for pro wrestling, not just for the NWA letters, but for pro wrestling in general. So, how are you? Obviously, this is something you and Billy have been working towards for quite a while. How do you feel now that everything's done and Billy has ownership of this brand?
I feel really good about it because we get to work, and we've been working on it honestly since, the discussions of this started actually back in February. So it's been a long road to get here to October 1st, and now that it's across that line, the real brand building work starts today.
Okay, so I want to take everybody back before this NWA purchase began. Billy is the TNA president. We'll use TNA initials.
That's fine.
Because I don't think anybody wants to say F that owl. Billy is the TNA president. There's a falling out with Dixie Carter. He sues to get the company. He does not get the company, but what he does get is his money back. So this now leaves him with a pile of money that he can use in any way, shape, or form because it's his. At what point does the conversation become, well, this TNA thing may not happen, but the NWA's out there sitting around, and that's a brand name that people knew and at one point was a big brand name. Does this happen during the court case? Is it after the court case is settled and he's gotten his money back? At what point do you and Billy start looking out a window and seeing what else is out there in the landscape that might be a good purchase that could fit Billy's plans?
Well, actually it was a year ago almost today when it was kind of the maneuverings of the TNA world, Bound for Glory. Everyone sort of knows the history that I think we all realized that it was going to be a hell of a fight to get TNA. And ultimately, I think, hindsight, I'm kind of happy we didn't end up with it just because of the financial arbitrage that was ahead if we would have gotten it. But, the day I tendered my resignation and Billy had been fired the day before as president, even though the lawsuit or the settlement hadn't been done, we knew we were going to work. And we started having meetings 2 weeks later. The Ring of Honor meeting that came out much later was actually happened in November. We knew we wanted to do something. I think we felt we had a lot of talent to bring the business still. And so we knew we wanted to do something, I guess is the best way to say it. And we didn't have really sort of a plan at that point. We were sort of fielding we decided to kind of take the field and see what was out there. So Billy actually had investigated the NWA thing, I think even while we were still at TNA, because he knew a rebrand was definitely needed. And I wasn't part of those discussions with Bruce Tharp then, but those discussions continued on forward. But they really didn't get serious until we finished 30 days, when Billy and I literally talked wrestling for 30 straight days while we were making those documentaries. So basically things didn't really get cooking on the NWA thing until mid-February. And we basically had a deal the week of WrestleMania. or actually before. So we had kind of hoped to get this information out sooner, but then complications got involved.
Well, we'll talk about that. I'm assuming we'll talk about some of these complications in a second, but I want to bring it back to you for a second. Billy doesn't end up with the company. The next day you resign.
Yep.
Is there a cause and effect there? Was it, all right, Billy's out, and I believe in Billy's vision, and I'm going to follow Billy Corgan? Like, I know you've touched upon this elsewhere, but you've never been on PW Insider where we've had a chance to talk to you about it. Talk about why you left Impact as opposed to, hey, I'm getting a paycheck here. I know what I'm going to get out of this company. Why go on the less traveled path of, I don't know what's going to happen here with Billy Corgan, if he's going to give up on wrestling, or he's going to go and tour at the Pumpkins, or go write another poetry book, and maybe this is just a passing fancy. Why make that choice to leave Impact at the time period that you did, and how much of it was Billy's gone, so I'm leaving with Billy?
It was actually 100% my decision. It was the court case, I think, had closed the week before. I can't remember the timing exactly. And, obviously I talk to Billy every day. Still today, we talk every day about everything. And so when he became president, we got really close. I got him one really important meeting that, was going to lead sort of the direction of the company moving forward if we got it. But even if we didn't, it was like the greatest connection we could have had. And, that kind of, you get into the weird politics of wrestling. It did not make me the most popular person with certain people. And so when Billy was out, I could have stayed. I was an employee. I had an employee agreement, and I was valuable. That there weren't, and probably still aren't, people besides Matt Conway who can do what Matt and I did. And we were a really strong team. And I had a long discussion with my supervisor at the time, John Gaborick, and I asked a very simple question: who was my boss? Who was my boss moving forward? Because with Anthem, I had a couple questions. Is the company moving to Canada? And nobody had any answers. I believed at the time that was probably the best thing. If it was a Canadian-owned company, that's what the best thing would be. And I had went through a transition when Ring of Honor got bought by Sinclair. Every time new ownership takes over something, everything changes. They tell you it won't, but it does. So, I had a long discussion with John about what was happening, and I was told there was going to be the writing team was going to go from Matt Conway and I to involve 5 or 6 other people, none of who were going to write anything. So I was really wondering what my position would be, and no one could clearly tell me who my boss was. And, when I went to his house that day to tender my resignation, I gave him my prediction on who I thought would actually come back and run the company. And it turned out to actually be true. And, I was happy to go, and I let him know that I was not going to say anything bad about the company because I really don't have anything bad to say. I told Ed Nordholm this the other day. A lot of my favorite things that I've ever done in the history of my career are in that company. They're in that library. So, I'm very happy with my 5 full years I worked there.
All right, I think you just kind of backdoored into some information. Why were you speaking to Ed Nordholm the other day?
Billy and I have chatted with Ed about the NWA and various different endeavors. Obviously, everyone knows that Billy has been speaking to Ed about the Hardy issue, and Ed's not been shy about talking about content providers for his network. We have no deal in place, but we've had multiple discussions with him about providing content and helping with the network.
Is this just for the Global Wrestling Network, or is this discussions about you potentially or the NWA potentially taking over Impact or working in conjunction with Impact? Does this have to do with the Impact brand, or? It
was multiple. It was kind of a wide open discussion, and and Billy talked about it in Sports Illustrated. It was just a discussion to help kind of brand both brands. And Billy's not shy about talking about, like, he has never really had full control of a wrestling company. He's always kind of worked for other people. So, he had offered to bring the NWA to the Global Wrestling Network, or whatever we're going to call it, and pair it up sort of as a SmackDown to Raw with Impact. So, it was a pitch. We had a meeting about it, and it's what it was. You know what I mean? Like, it was, and by the way, there's lots of meetings that happen like that. Just people don't know about it because it isn't public information at that point.
All right, so we may end up back with on
That's
the
fine.
Impact topic, but since you mentioned Nordholm, I was like, wait a minute, let's not ignore that little factoid there.
But back to your original question, it was my decision. Billy made it clear that he still wanted to do wrestling, and I took the evening, the day he was let go, and I thought about it a lot, and I spoke to Matt Conway about it and let him know what I was thinking about doing, and obviously Matt and I are in different places in our lives, and he's got children, and at the time had a pregnant wife, and it's a very personal decision to decide to leave your job of multiple years that pays you pretty well to basically write for dudes who do fighting in a ring. You know what I mean? Like it's a very hard job, but it's also I'm not digging ditches, and I was always felt very good to have that job. And it's hard to walk away with, especially like you said, an unknown. And Billy and I sort of had a handshake agreement of what we were going to do, except there was no guarantees, but I think it was a smart decision on my hand because I literally went to work 2 days later on a project for Ringling Brothers. I got that phone call 5 minutes after I hung up with my last conversation with Dixie Carter. So it was, I was very happy with my decision and still am here 11 months later.
All right, so one more TNA question, then I want to dive into the deep end of the pool with the future of the National Wrestling Alliance. Who do you blame for the state of TNA today? Do you think it is the after effects of Dixie? Is it Jeff Jarrett approached the situation wrong? Is it Anthem Media maybe didn't wrap their heads completely around what they were getting themselves into? Like when you look at Impact, the ratings have been down in comparison to where they were. The writing at times is not at the same level, although I do think the show has been better in the last 4 to 5 weeks, specifically since Jim Cornette came on as a performer. And there's been a huge turnaround in talent that was established. Hardy's, Drew McIntyre, who I want to talk to in a second about, and others gone, replaced with talents who have not been built up the way that you and Conway and Gaborik built up Allie and Laurel Van Ness and other characters. From the outside looking in, what do you owe the state of that company to be, right? And if you look at that company and you look at where it is now, that's the effect. What was the cause in your eyes that's where Impact is 8 months into Anthem's ownership?
Well, it's hard. I don't want to really comment on the last 8 months because I wasn't there, but I think clear vision has always sort of plagued the company. Even when I worked there, I had 4.5 bosses in 5 years. You know what I mean? Like we had regime changes and things would change, and even my coming in, I was hired to do not Impact, and I was doing it, and I was told that we would have a discussion if I was ever going to do Impact, and I was on Impact 4 months after I got to the company because Vince Russo left, and then Bischoff, and then Bruce left, and there was never a clear vision or a clear set of goals, and I think that's really important in any business endeavor. Everyone sort of has to know what the finish line is. Are we a TV company? Are we a live event company? Are we a pay-per-view company? And everyone has to work towards a consistent goal. And that wasn't really there, ever.
Okay, so October 2nd, 2017, what sort of company is the National Wrestling Alliance going to be? People are excited about this changeover because Billy's name is involved, and with Billy's name comes a brand name that opens doors that the normal person walking into a potential business relationship or a television network may not open otherwise. I know based on emails I've received in the last couple of months, where's the video on demand component going? Are their talents going to be announced? Who are the champions? Is there television? When are they running their first show? All of these are valid questions from fans, including some who would like to see what has been a very tarnished and fragmented NWA brand shined up and put back on the magical pedestal that they believe the NWA should be, based on nostalgia and romanticism of their childhood. So I want to go through these different things.
Sure.
As we stand here today on October 2nd, what is the strategy for this company? Are we looking at immediate announcements on television, on talent, on anything? Or is it, Billy's hoarding this and and I don't mean that in like a negative A&E network hoarders sort of way. He's going to hold on to this, bide his time, and decide how he's going to roll this out. I don't imagine Billy's going to be the type of guy who in 3 days we're going to hear boom, 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 and know the entire strategy. But what can we know, and what is the strategy as you open these doors and the future begins for this brand?
There's obviously a lot of wonder, and everyone's got a lot of expectations with it. And I think the clearest way, what we bought is what we're focused on: the Shield and that championship. the NWA World Heavyweight Championship has been the sort of Adam Pearce called it the godfather of every championship in the history of the business. Every organization's world championship has spurned off of the NWA world title. I mean, it's from WWE to AWA to WCW to ECW to TNA. The history of all of those titles spurns off one. And I think legacy is important. And I think, and we've already started it, the reestablishing the importance of the singular world heavyweight champion and what those 3 letters means is paramount. And every decision we make from this point forward moves forward. So I'll use a car company analogy. Why do I need to be like everybody else when Elon Musk is making a car company like Tesla that doesn't have a giant car lot that you can walk 100 cars? They have a small store that they have one model in. We want to approach this completely different. And Billy has a 20-year vision for this brand. And it's been neglected, and it's been sort of carnied for the last 5, 10, 15. I mean,
come on. No. You're being too kind. 1992 on.
Yeah, and honestly, if you go back and read the history of and why all these different wrestling organizations spurned off, it's hard to get 5 people to decide where to go to dinner, let alone let 20 promoters decide what's the best thing for a singular brand. So one of the most interesting and probably best things that Bruce Tharpe did was consolidate the control of the brand under one person. Because even before he got it, it was still under control of multiple promoters with each having different agendas. And it goes back to the thing I talked about at TNA. When you have multiple people deciding multiple directions, you don't have you have multiples of options. The one good thing about Billy is he'll set a vision and we'll move forward with it. And we're going to find what feels right for those 3 letters. And it's tied to the past. I think we all have warm and fuzzies from 1984 to 1986 NWA, and even earlier for some. And that's when I became a fan, and that championship and what it meant to Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, and everybody who ever held it, from Harley Race all the way down to Lou Thez. There's an energy that goes behind it. And while I'm not saying, yes, we'll have TV on November 5th from this place, every decision we make will be based upon that energy. And you might think it's a kind of a weird answer, but I think it's what every decision and everything we've already started to put into it. It's a reestablishing the brand and not worrying about the small stuff.
So you talk about the history when it comes to Lou Thez and Dusty and Ric Flair. All right, not to be cruel here, because I love the man as a performer as much as anybody else, and his creativity and his charisma were off the charts. But Dusty's dead. And we talk about warm and fuzzies, okay?
Yep.
1986, I was 12 years old. I'm 43 now, okay? Yep. Is it even possible or feasible to try and rekindle that electricity or energy, as you said, given that on a national level, most people think NWA turned into WCW, WCW died, it's 17 years later. Like, is the idea here to use the initials, hopefully get some people interested when it comes to the older demographic and do something fresh? Or are we going to try and connect back to the past? Is that how the Paul Boesch family library comes into this? I don't know. Maybe it does. I'm being speculative here. But, like, is it even worth the effort to try and pull the past into 2017? Or is it just smarter to go, this is the National Wrestling Alliance, and have Billy's unique twist on pro wrestling using the NWA brand? Like, why even is it even feasible to go back? Like, listen, every year I go to Charlotte, North Carolina for the NWA Legends Fan Fest. or the Mid-Atlantic Fan Fest, or whatever they're calling it this year. And I go there because I want to step back into the 80s, and I want to step back and see Tully Blanchard and the Rock and Roll Express as a fan. And I've often said many times, it's where I go to recharge my batteries and remind myself why I first fell in love with pro wrestling. And it does give me an energy and kind of kickstarts me into the last half of the year. But on a major scale, when it comes to building a brand and building a foundation for a brand, which you guys, let's face it, you have letters, you have a skeleton, and you have to build that skeleton into something viable.
Yep.
Is it even worth trying and touch upon that energy of what it used to be? Can it be rekindled, or do you think maybe that's a mistake and we just have to look to the future?
Well, I'm not going to have the second coming of the American dream. The energy we're talking about is these characters that you all associated with, that we associated with. I used to go to the Civic Center in Philadelphia, and everybody that's ever seen Terry Funk felt like something. You know what I mean? He was an outlaw. Ric Flair felt like something. He was the gold standard of pro wrestling. Everybody, these characters were well defined, and they got to speak from their heart. And they got to be who they were. And I think you could say in 2017, that's kind of lost. And, strong characters and fights that matter. I think wrestling has kind of got off in this direction that it's heavily criticized and, you could say overbooked. And you could say there's no uniqueness to each organization now. And the NWA stood for a certain style. And especially in the mid-'80s when WWF went cartoony, NWA stood for this sense of almost real fighting. And, you'd hear Dory Funk and Jack Briscoe talk about when he was the world champion about, when the NWA world title was defended, they almost felt it was real. And I think that's the kind of thing we're looking to recreate and finding progressive 21st century ways to tell those stories. Syndicated television is only one part of the world now, just like cable. Getting a cable television deal in 2017 is not as home run as it was in 2001. Hell, look what it did to ECW in 1999. It didn't save them. You have to build a brand so strong and scale it. And that's why we're starting the way we are. I'm not going to hire 40 guys and go do a television taping just because we want to do television. We're going to find ways to build what we bought. That logo and that world championship. If Tim Storm, who's the current NWA world champion, is all we focus on and the story of rebuilding that title and making him mean something and the guys that fight him and tell a really good story, that's I think the strength of the brand is the story around that championship.
So you talk about how you've got to scale things and things cannot be, all right, cable TV plopped on this time slot. That's not the answer. That's not the golden goose. You mentioned earlier doing the documentaries with Billy where you went on tour and every day there was something different.
Yep.
Then you did a long-form documentary with Drew McIntyre.
Yep.
Which was supposed to document his WrestleMania week, but as it turned out, documented the end of him on the independents and returning to NXT.
Yep.
When I watched the Corgan stuff and he's in a different town every night, I was like, oh, it's kind of like the traveling NWA champion of yore.
Yep.
The old days. Was that the concept? Was this kind of like a backdoor pilot in a way? Like, oh, we're going to do this without telling people what we're doing?
Yep.
Like, and the McIntyre stuff, how much of that is the sort of flavor that you're looking at doing here? Because, you could create content and put it out online. So, like, give us some insight into, was the Corgan thing plugging? Am I right on the Corgan thing was kind of a backdoor pilot? Is the McIntyre thing sort of the flavor of what you're going for, or were those just independent things where you were just testing creativity and trying different outlets?
I think the idea with both was to explore what's possible at scale. When Billy and I were on the road, it was Billy and I, and for about half the trip, a man by the name of Joseph Hudson, and we were in an RV. And the goal was to see how many views and how much content we could create across the 30 days. They had taken the trip the year before and done some stuff. And, picking the camera up for me was something I really wanted to do this past year. One of the reasons when I left TNA, that was sort of my mission statement of sort of the Wild West of creativity. And when we started the road trip, I had no idea that it was going to be what it was. So we thought it would be interesting if we put out a new video every day. And it was they were tied together, but individually, it was very artistic. There was no sort of through line except this journey across the U.S. And, I'll go back and watch one or two of them, at the gym or whatever, just to kind of remind myself of what we did. They were test grounds because I feel like in wrestling, the things that people are most interested in, you never see. The backstage stuff, the traveling, I thought, go all the way back to 2009 in Cabana's Wrestling Road Diaries. That was one of the more interesting things I've ever seen because it was so real, and it had documented Bryan Danielson's trip to WWE, and the Galloway thing wasn't supposed to be what it became, but like these things happen, and the DSLR cameras they make it easy for anybody to pick up and make anything at any time. I mean, there's a whole culture on YouTube making content every day. So when Billy and I decided to go on the road, it was one because, it was the start of the new year, and he writes music when he was out there. And if you've seen the documentaries, that's how he sort of gets his process together. And we weren't going to be doing wrestling. So, let's get out there for 30 days. And honestly, we were gone 42 because we were in LA for a week after. And it was just this unique journey. And it was fun because you got tested every day. You didn't have time to debate. And I think in wrestling, a lot of people spend more time debating than actually creating of what's good, and you get immediate audience feedback. So when we started to explore, when we basically got done with the road trip, is when we started to explore the NWA thing. And obviously, as talent left TNA, Drew was somebody that obviously I was very close with, and Billy as well. And I called Drew and said, "Listen, we want to test something." And it was always supposed to be a test shoot. It wasn't going to be. It was going to be multiple pieces, and the idea was, could we create a serialized story around one wrestler traveling the globe? If you remember, Drew was going back and forth between the UK. He was working for Evolve. He was working sort of everywhere, and we were going to try and build out this 13-episode series, and that WrestleMania one was going to be sort of a part of it. And obviously things shifted, but it was interesting to kind of capture the story as it happened, and obviously what we caught, and it was one of the first Lightning One productions besides the Billy documentary. It was an interesting journey, and when I finished it, I wasn't sure what I was going to get out of it. Like when we finished shooting, I didn't really have the feeling, and then as Drew got more and more popular, we decided to put it out in conjunction with him winning the NXT title, and I think it really kind of worked to help tell his story deeper.
The sort of inside storytelling that was featured in the McIntyre documentary, does that sort of internal showcase in terms of what's going on backstage, decisions of booking and things like that, does that help? Does that help build a brand, or is that counterproductive to trying to build a brand in terms of the vision that you guys currently have? Because I don't like, there's such a thing as presenting something for just a smart audience, but also losing everybody with just having inside baseball talk and terminology.
Of course.
Like, will there be, like, if you guys go in that route with the NWA, are you looking at more of a balance? So it's sort of like, it's you get an idea into the inside of who these personalities are, but not giving away the booking side of things or the creative decision making side. Like, where do you stand on that? Because you're trying to present something for an audience, especially if it's through an online medium. Chances are most of that audience is very keen to what wrestling is, and while they may enjoy the creativity, you're also on the double-edged sword of they may reject being spoken down to because they know the way the wrestling business really works.
I think we'll explore everything. I think that's I think your website and a lot of other websites, and there's now 600 podcasts that spend hours dissecting everything. There's more content, as much wrestling content as there's even more content dissecting it. And I think will we have a traditional studio wrestling show that feels like 1984 Georgia Championship Wrestling? Yes. But why can't I also explore the other part of the world for a different audience and let the audience decide what they want to watch? So yes, I think everything is on the table, and I think that's the interesting part and where Billy's open to exploring it. But I also think it may be interesting in exploration to let people be their characters who they are on the television show. I don't need a plumber. You know what I mean? Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, was who he was. You know what I mean? There wasn't much of a gimmick there. Same with Flair. That's what I mean about the energy of the NWA. You know, even the Road Warriors, while they were a gimmick, it wasn't against type. That's who they were. So we're going to explore all this stuff because guess what? That's the way the real world's going. You know, and one thing, you know, people talk about how brands change and, oh, I wish the Monday Night War would come back or hey, I'd love the NWA to be like it was in 1984. The world is vastly different. You are a character now. Each individual person is a character. They have as much content created for themselves via Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. We're all now these characters, and I don't think entertainment has caught up yet. Brad Pitt doesn't have an Instagram page, and I think he almost should, because the mystique of being a star, there are now celebrities that you've never heard of with 3.5 to 6.5 million followers on Instagram that are being paid a lot of money and making deals and have an audience that are leveraged far higher than Brad Pitt. Logan Paul has more fans concurrently than Brad Pitt.
So with all of that said, how do you take that knowledge of that there's a different world out there, looking at the Logan Pauls of the world, and leverage that to create interest and money into a professional wrestling platform,
Sure,
which has always made money with certain revenue streams and has always focused upon a certain audience? How do you get the millennials, for lack of a better term, to care about pro wrestling? Because that's where the money is, and you got to chase where the money is. You can't just chase the same fans who are watching Raw and SmackDown or TNA, because those fans honestly are satiated with what they're getting, and I think oversatiated. So how do you find a new audience? How do you take what you've bought and transform that into something that still appeals to existing wrestling fans, but appeals to something else? Like, obviously, sure, you don't have, you know, you can't give away every plan here, but like, how do you do that? How do you not just create content for YouTube and throw it out there and it just sits there in a void and no one's really paying attention to it? Like, how do you do that?
You have to find, this is what's interesting is, you know, when you create content for YouTube or you create content for Facebook or Instagram or Musically, you have to create the content that is native to the platform, and you have to integrate and you have to engage the people that are on there. Why are 14-year-olds not watching wrestling anymore? Because they're not engaged to. WWE Snapchat is like their Instagram, like their TV show. It's just all promotion. You have to make these characters live 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in these platforms and engage and let their story come through. For example,
Can I cut you off here?
Yeah.
You were with Impact. Impact already did that with the 365 YouTube thing. What's the difference?
But they didn't, and we didn't. It was because it was written. That's what I'm saying is that this is where we have to scale. We have to find 2, 3, 4 people that are willing to commit and will commit, and people already have, and to go on this journey with us to do something different. The wrestling business is stuck in 2011. People tweet. That's it. Nobody's telling their story beyond there. When Raw ends at 11:05, you wait until 8:05 the next Monday for the story to continue. That's what happens. And people don't live their lives that way. Look at our president. Look at how stories are told every day in every platform. That's what I mean is in building a brand, you have to kind of focus on where the audience is. And that's the point. Yeah, we didn't do it Impact because we didn't commit to it. And you have to find, and that's where you can't commit to it with 40 people. You got to start small and get the right amount of people. That's why the NWA World Champion, and it's funny, the Galloway documentary goes back to an idea I gave Adam Pearce when he was the NWA World Champion. And this was in the very infancy of digital video in 2009 about him documenting every one of his defenses. And so the NWA World Champion, that could be a digital show, but it also lives across multiple platforms. And it's this energy that goes around what it means to be that champion. You see a lot of people with a lot of belts, but what does it mean to be a champion? Like what does it mean? Show me what it means if you're really a champion, like what that life is like. It's hard. You know what I mean? You know, guys are on the road, but I don't think anybody truly documents what it's like to be on the road. So that's what I mean, making native. Nobody cuts. I saw Becky Lynch actually cut a localized promo for somewhere in Colorado recently. It's like if Dusty Rhodes was alive, he'd be doing that every day, all the time to sell tickets. I don't think people want to. That's the interesting part. I see these guys put posters up on Facebook, and then the show has 23 people.
Yep. I just talked about on Facebook in the last couple of weeks, driving through Queens one day, I was struck and shocked that I was driving past a school in Glendale, Queens, and there was a huge vinyl poster on the fence of the school, one on each side of the school, if you were going left to right or if you're going north to south or east to west past the school. Live pro wrestling. Here's the date. Here's the website. Here's the tickets. Here's the, like nobody does that anymore. That old school style. Like I remember, and I've said this many times. I can remember like Halloween Havoc, the first one in 1989.
I was there.
The promos. And being so excited about it, going to my father and saying, can we go to Philadelphia to see this? And my dad said, that's like 8 hours away. Of course, I lived in New York. Who the hell knew? I didn't know what geography was back then. You didn't have Google. My dad lied to me. He just didn't want to go to the show. But, like I remember that energy of, I want to go. And I don't remember, and I go to a lot of shows. And I don't want anybody to think I'm disrespecting, like, the shows that I go to. But I don't recall the last time that somebody talked me into a building.
Yes. And that's the key, and that's what I mean. That's why literally we stripped the company down to the studs. And a lot of people have said a lot of things about, well, they don't know what they're doing. That is the why. Nobody focuses on the why. They focus on the how or the what. But why is this important? And I think you were there the night, Mike, that Shane threw the belt down.
I was sitting in the front row.
Yeah, I was there, I think, with my brother-in-law at the time, and it was, I think you could say that that's when the company really fell on hard times because it was just it was that era died, and I think a lot of people were hurt by it. And I'm not saying that's a reason we're moving forward with it, but that's when people stopped caring about it. And our jobs, Billy, I, and everybody we're going to work with, is to make that why important. And why, like, we all, I ask people all the time, like, why do you watch 3 hours of Raw? And it's hard for them to verbalize the why. I think just because, well, that's what you do on Monday nights. And literally finding a new yes, the NWA speaks to a 57-year-old audience because guess what? That's the median age. Go look at the median age of Raw and Impact and Lucha Underground. It's 57. The audience is aged up. And it means there's a whole new audience out there that you have to figure out how to speak to. Guess what? I don't have the playbook. But I'm going to work really hard because nobody else is, because they're going to be too worried about doing 19 run-ins on a show in front of 20 people that are going to come no matter if you did the 20 run-ins or 15 or 1. And that's what I mean is this is going to take a long time to figure out. So if you think I'm going to announce 2 days from now something that's going to blow your mind, it's a lot of hard work. This is 20 years to fix this brand because it has been neglected for 20 years. And a lot of people have worked really hard on it, but a lot of people have taken advantage of it over a long period of time.
Well, let me touch upon something you just said about a lot of people worked on it. As of today, October 2nd, who is officially on board with the National Wrestling Alliance? Where does Bruce Tharp, where does James Beard, and all of these other people who were involved in different aspects, where do the affiliates land in all of this? We've heard, the agreements ended on October 1st. That's why nothing was going to be done until October 1st rolled around. The clock has struck 12. It's now October 2nd. Where the previous regime that the NWA was built around, the licensees, Bruce Tharp, etc., where do they fit into the jigsaw puzzle that is the National Wrestling Alliance under Billy's vision as of today? Where do any of them fit in? Have they been kind of pushed out the door? Here's your money. Thanks. God bless. Goodbye. Like, where does it all stand? Or is it still to be determined?
So when we took over the brand and discussions, again, it became public in May, but, we really didn't take over till July. There were pieces that were still even down to the Houston library, was still kind of like being decided. And that's why we've been very quiet. That's why I've done no interviews and discussed nothing of it because it's, there was a lot to be determined. As far as the affiliates, the money they paid went to the previous corporation. These affiliates all paid varying amounts to Bruce Tharp for a license. All the licenses ended on October 1st. We're very clear from the beginning that we were most likely not going to continue the licensee program because it was not beneficial to the brand nor the licensee. They didn't get a lot. They got some letters, and they had to book the champions. And that was it. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't really get a lot of support. There wasn't an infrastructure. There was no home office. There were no wrestlers under contract. It was really kind of a system that didn't benefit anybody. And it was a shame because, you know, at the time, if you go back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there was a real power to being an NWA member. And that's what I mean. We looked at it, and I spoke to every affiliate, and I made myself available to every affiliate. I went to 6 or 7 shows. I chatted with those there, but I would answer the phone every time they called because I felt it was important that they had someone to speak to in this time of transition. Some were very disappointed that they were not going to continue on. They put a lot of money into these companies, and I sympathized with it and offered my help to help any future branding. How can I help your business now? You know, so that was important. As far as Bruce Tharp, Bruce has been sort of consulting and helping with if he had ideas or if we have questions about the previous thing. Bruce is not he's not on a staff. You know what I mean? He's been nothing but helpful and been great in this transition. Guys like James Beard, James has been invaluable to me in understanding sort of the dynamics of the previous system. So whenever I didn't really understand sort of the issues that somebody was having, he would help translate, and you know, he was been very helpful. And a lot of what everybody was promised was simply this: I'm not sure what we're doing and when. Meaning, I don't know. We could run a show as early as November 15th, or we could run one January 1st. But I promised those who were willing to stick out and communicate clearly that they would get an at-bat. So that means if James Beard wants to be a ref on the shows and be involved, he'll get that at-bat. And anybody that we treated equally as fairly as they did in return would get the same privilege. Some people decided not to take that and decided that they wanted to go off on their own direction. And guess what? That's fine. They're allowed because I didn't buy their businesses. And some of them didn't understand that. And like, well, you're my boss. No, I'm not. You are your own boss. You have a license. So, you know, it was a difficult transition, but I think it was one that I think needed to be done because I think a lot of people, I learned a lot about a lot of the people that were in the organization. And I think that's why we took it to the studs. And honestly, the only person that's on board is me and Billy at this point, officially. And as the company scales, we'll add people that are smart and willing to work hard.
You said the only people who are on board are you and Billy, but Tim Storm's the NWA champion. So what does that mean for the championships?
We are focusing on Tim, and I have an agreement with Tim about moving forward and been very clear with him. You know, it's important. You know, I don't think when you say the name Tim Storm, I think a lot of people go, who? And Tim will even say that. And you know, I made an agreement with Tim as far as moving forward as long as he's champion. So, you know, Tim is going to be our champion as long as we'd like him to. And that's where we're focused right now. The rest of the titles are sort of in this suspended animation is the best way to describe it because no disrespect to the junior heavyweight champion or the tag champions, I think the brand is known most heavily for that world heavyweight title. And so as we tell a very singular, strong rebranding story, we're going to focus on Tim Storm and the NWA world title. And, you know, starting this weekend, you know, we made an agreement for Tim Storm to appear on Dave Marquez's Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. Dave is not an NWA affiliate, which some people seem to think he is. You know, Dave's a friend. When I left WWE, he was the first person to call me. Said, "Hey, I know you're in LA. Come have fun with Adam Pearce and I." That was it. This was in 2008. And, you know, as we got the brand, you know, Dave has been someone that I've always leaned on for history. And, you know, he made a proposal to say, listen, I'd love to feature the world title on my show through the end of the year. Here's some ideas. And we discussed it, and we came to an agreement on how we're going to do that. And Tim Storm will be appearing on Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, which is expanding on a lot of CW stations starting this weekend. And it's really cool that you tell me, Mike, when's the last time the NWA world title was on national television like that?
When Masa Chono and Rick Rude were fighting for it at Halloween Havoc 92, maybe?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
92 or 93, because 93 is when WCW decided to switch the NWA belt from Flair to Rick Rude, but not tell the National Wrestling Alliance, which led to the whole injunction,
Yep.
and Flair and Rude were fighting over the quote-unquote big gold belt.
That's right.
So we're looking at the summer of '93. It was the last time the NWA was on quote-unquote national television.
Well, and broadcast television. And some people will say what does that mean? It's one brick at a time. And, Tim walked out, and it was interesting when and people will see it, and it's like they just knew he was the world champion. That belt just meant something to that audience there. And I had met Tim once or twice before, and I think people are going to see a really interesting champion. You know what I mean? He's not a gimmick. He's a guy that's older. You know what I mean? And I think he would say the same. And he's a guy that lived his whole career to get this shot. And that's what I said to him. I said, listen, you are as important as Harley Race to the legacy of that title. And it would be a disrespect to treat him otherwise. And that was my promise to him. And so my job, along with Billy, is to make you care about the NWA World Champion and Tim Storm, which I can see people's eyes rolling going, well, who's Tim Storm? I guarantee by the time that he is no longer champion, you're going to care about him and want to see him fight to get the title back. And maybe that story takes a lot longer than people think. People thought we were going to take him out to LA and beat him the first time. Again, what does that do? And that's where the short-sightedness of some people who carry agendas, it's funny. But, Tim is a quality human being, and that is very hard to find. And, to take a risk on something like this is, it was hard, and we had a really long discussion about it. And it's amazing when you just can tell someone's real, and that's a story we want to tell.
The other championships, what's the status with them? Will those champions be brought into the fold, or are we starting fresh? Maybe some of these belts are going to be discontinued or developed over time. Like, obviously, there's other champions out there. In fact, there's probably too many NWA champions out there. Where do we stand with that, or is that small potatoes compared to trying to figure out what the proper vision for this is?
There are so many NWA titles that don't exist anymore. And, if like there's an NWA this and an NWA that, whoever are those people, this is branding. They can't use the logo. They can't use the letters moving forward. And they all know it. You know what I mean? There's no more affiliates. So there's no more NWA Central States champion. There's just not. That's where the affiliations ran out, and everyone was made well aware of it. As far as the other titles that came with the purchase, we're not focusing on them right now. And I was very clear to all those champions about what our plans were. And I'm not going to have a tournament tomorrow to crown a new NWA World Tag Team Champions, because again, you got to get the top thing right. And I think sometimes, and Heyman used to get in trouble with Vince because he would spend as much time on Jamie Noble and Nydia and not the World Championship. And I think if we're going to get this brand right, it's important to focus on everything, but we don't have a 2-hour television show. That's the other thing that's interesting right now. And it goes back to the energy we were talking about the brand. When you used to watch the NWA, it was important. You know what I mean? Like, even if you go back and watch it now, you're like, God, why did I watch it? Because it felt important to you. When the Boogie Woogie Man would come out, you were into the character. And it felt like your time was wasted because, storylines paid off. The stories connected. You went to see the event at the Civic Center or wherever, and it was important. The vision that Billy has and the vision that I have and the vision that we are working towards is making everything that you put your time into with the brand feel important. So distracting it by having too many directions right off the top as we build it, you know what I mean? We don't have a television show right now, but when we do, we're going to make sure it feels really important.
The NWA footage, the Paul Boesch material.
Yep.
The video on demand channel has shut down.
Yep.
We've reported previously that Billy purchased Bruce Tharp's position as the representative of that material, but the material is still owned by Paul Boesch's family.
Yes.
Where does this material figure into future plans? Because when the initial purchase for the NWA was going down, this library was not initially included in the vision. So what changed that made Billy decide we need to bring this under the same umbrella? How will it be utilized, if it's utilized at all? And will the fact that the family owns it, not Billy, cause issues in how you can use that material?
No, the licensing agreement's actually pretty clear as far as the one that Bruce put together, and we basically took that over. The reason the on-demand service, it was Bruce's business. I don't think we agreed with. I feel like I think Billy would agree, and he talked about this in the Sports Illustrated piece. There's a lot of fragmentation as far as content goes. There's a lot of on-demand services and paywalls, and services have 4,000 viewers, and it's locked behind a paywall, and a lot of people don't see it. It's sort of like the podcast boom that happened. Before 2010, a lot of really good audio was behind paywalls. And when Podcast One and Austin and everybody, started doing podcasts, I did one in 2011. It was one of the early ones like Cabanas that wasn't behind a paywall, and it was in sort of the iTunes system. We're looking at how can we leverage this library as part of the brand building. And that doesn't mean we can't monetize it. Doesn't mean we can't make a deal with Snapchat to develop shows around classic wrestling footage. And those are the deals we're exploring. But those deals take time. And so that's what the licensing agreement allows us to do, is to monetize the library in those things. So if Mike Johnson's doing a documentary on the Guerrero brothers, I have footage in this library per Billy's license agreement. I can license you Hector and Chavo's matches. And that's the interesting thing is that's where we're open for business instead of just simply having an on-demand service. If Sports Illustrated or ESPN wants to license some footage, just like WWE, we're in that business as well. And that's why having this agreement is really helpful. And, the family has a vision of what they think that library could be. And, they obviously put Bruce in charge of it. And, I think time will tell what ultimately happens with it. But for now, we have that agreement that allows us to do whatever we want to brand build. And I've looked through 30% of it, and there's some really interesting stuff in there. And what's interesting is it spans a lot of different wrestling organizations because Paul Boesch worked with everybody. Like, there are localized promos that Vince McMahon did with Bob Backlund and Afa when he sent a WWF title match to Paul Boesch's Night of Champions. It's just interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff. There's Dusty Rhodes wrestling for the AWA title against Nick Bockwinkel. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that I don't think a lot of people have seen. The 2-ring battle royals. And I know Bruce Pritchard talked about it a lot on his Something to Wrestle With podcast. And, I think it's a lot of interesting characters. And you really don't realize how much of the success of WWF and NWA in the mid-'80s was pulled from territories. And you see guys that, like, I didn't realize how much Tito Santana had wrestled down there. And there's a lot, like, it's just interesting to see these guys from the late 70s and early 80s before the big wrestling boom, and these territories were stocked full of talent. And again, it's happening today with all these independent groups and guys getting called into WWE, but it just felt different back then.
The National Wrestling Alliance as a whole, as we talked about, kind of holds this mystical quality for fans. How much of that helps with branding and trying to sell it to potential business partners versus, hey, this is Billy Corgan wrestling? Like, does one counteract the other, or do they complement each other?
I think they help each other. Because again, before we decided to do the NWA thing, Billy and I kicked around a bunch of names. And think about how many wrestling organizations exist now with different names. Like, there are so many. There's so many. And I mean, just Impact alone, you know what I mean, has had so many different names. And when you can get one that instantaneously is Googleable, that WWE has a whole library of, like, that's the interesting part. Everyone's like, well, you don't have the WWE library that they have. I said, great, it's on their service. You know what I mean? Like, yes, I don't have it, but I also don't have to pay for it. You know what I mean? It's there. It exists on YouTube, on their service. And am I going to be able to monetize it? No, but that's okay because I didn't have to pay for it. And it's all there, and there's this interesting thing around it. So as far as like the energy that goes around it and what kind of flows from it, Billy, we joked, we used to call it BCW, Billy Corgan Wrestling. And like, if we did that, then it would be, every article how it would be written. Oh, the rock star is got a wrestling company. Billy is very particular about keeping his music separate from this project. That's why the NWA is perfect, because it's so traditional and it matches so much of his sensibilities in wrestling. I think people have a misconception because he's done a lot of interviews where he talks about a lot of different stuff, but he is a traditionalist through and through. And that's I think the interesting part of where we want to take it. It's a very traditional approach, but it's also not going to be 1950s wrestling. It's going to be a very unique vision, but told in every platform that exists. And we're going to take it one step at a time as we do it, because guess what? Nobody has the answers. By the way, nobody in television has the answers. If you go pay attention, and it's funny because I talk about a lot of this stuff on my Twitter to deafening silence. But if I tell an old CM Punk story, everyone's really invested in those tweets. But there is a lot of interesting stuff happening in television and media right now on a day-to-day basis. I just saw a stat, like 370,000 people watched the NFL game on Amazon this past Thursday. The way people get content is changing every minute in every way. And, that's why having a really strong brand that everything kind of ties to, you're not beholden to being on from 8 to 10 on some cable channel, because you hopefully will spread far across that. And that's why I think the brand is more important than being just Billy Corgan wrestling.
How do you spread the brand across multiple platforms without... All right, let me rephrase what I'm going to say.
Okay.
How do you spread the bread,
bread.
How do you spread the brand? I don't know what's going on here. How do you spread the brand over multiple platforms? Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook, broadcast, whatever, and somehow figure out a way to build off of that, as opposed to we're just shooting in this direction, and all of this content is going out into the abyss without any return. How do you find a return on that without, in a traditionalist sense, all right, we're going to be a television show, we're going to focus on a TV show, and we're going to make our revenue from that. Yes, the world has changed, but I feel like so many people are out there going in so many different directions, but not really monetizing or grabbing onto any of these directions and being better for it. How do you do that when you're starting from square one with this? You mentioned a potential studio show, you mentioned potential TV show, a Snapchat show, all these things, they all sound great on paper, but how do you take what's a great idea on paper and turn it into concrete money that makes it a worthwhile investment of your time and of Billy's investment as a creator and as the money guy that's going to back this? Well, how do you do that in 2017? I don't think that anybody knows how to do it.
Well, and I think that's where people scale too quickly with their wrestling company and their idea. That's wrestling at its core is conflict and story. It's two people getting in a ring and in conflict at its base core. If you look at what makes a wrestling show go, it's that simple thing. Why does a wrestling show have to be 2 hours? Why? Why does
because Nitro went to 2 hours and WWE followed. That's right. Why.
That's what I'm saying is why what. That's why the company is just Billy and I right now. Because why do I need to have a senior vice president of marketing? Why do I have to have an office full of people that are? That's the thing is when you're in a startup mode and look at companies like Uber who have not made any money. That you have to look at a trajectory, and it's the burn rate. That's why we are making very smart, fiscally responsible decisions as we brand build, but also spending money. We put a slate. We have had various discussions on programming. Okay, we're going to build out these digital shows. Great. How do we produce those in the most economical sense? WWE was producing a lot of shows for their network, correct? And what they realized was the amount of people that were watching it for the dollars they were spending on those shows wasn't worth it. So we're making the same type of decisions as far as, okay, well, what will this show cost? Great. What's the hope for it? Great. We'll do 13 of those. We're going to do a show about Tim Storm and his mother. Not that that's actually happening, but we would decide a project. Basically, I pitch Billy, this is what I want to do. I want to go to – that's what the Marquez project was. Okay, we're going to do this. Dave's going to give us this, and we're going to do this over this number of weeks. Great. What's that going to cost me? And that's how you do it. And that's the thing is I worked in wrestling for 15 years, and in all creative discussions, budget was never really ever brought up. And I know it's at a much higher pay grade, but you have to decide what you're going to spend, how many eyeballs it's going to be seen by, and what kind of audience do you build it on. At that core, because that's the thing, you put something behind a paywall, great. 1,000 people buy your iPay-per-view. Like that's like you have to look at what's the audience worth. And yes, by the way, you're not going to make money day one. You're not going to make money year one. You're not going to make money year 3 because you have to build a brand and you have to find where the audience is and figure out, yes, there is monetization that comes, but ultimately you want to get attention. Because if you don't have attention, there's no money to be made. If you don't have fans, there's no audience there. And if the more you put it behind a paywall, the less fans you're going to have.
I want to play devil's advocate
Sure.
here. You talked about something earlier about the fight needs to mean something, the championship needs to mean something, and the loss of that luster that we talked about with the NWA in the 80s.
Yep.
You're part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
There are going to be people who listen to this and say, you're a no-good writer who never took a bump, you don't know the business, and you were Vince's you took Vince's marching orders, you took Dixie's marching orders, and now you're trying to say something completely different when you're part of the problem and you were the one scripting the words in that verbiage that nobody speaks in any way, shape, or form like in real life unless they're appearing on a wrestling television show as a character. So someone's going to hear what you said earlier, and they probably rolled their eyes. Not saying everybody, but there's going to be a contingent out there, probably old-school wrestling fans or maybe people who are in the business. So what do you say to those people who say, Lagana, you're just as guilty as anybody else for the state of the business?
Because that was the native storytelling in the environment I worked in. At WWE, that format hasn't changed. That's the exciting part of what we're doing. Right now, we can do anything, and there's nobody that's going to say, "Ooh, you shouldn't do that. That's not going to work." And that's the thing. And here's the craziest part of the business. Yes, there's WWE. Yes, there's Impact. Yes, there's Ring of Honor. Yes, I guess there's Lucha Underground. Everybody else,
in theory,
everybody else is free. Guess what? The Young Bucks produce their own digital show. They don't have anybody writing it for them. Does well, right? People are entertained by it, and they watch it weekly. Who else?
I don't know.
That's the point. That's like, yes, guess what? The WWE pays writers. Tell me the last great independent wrestling story you've seen. I'll wait.
Davey Richards beating Eddie Edwards for the ROH title.
Yep. I did that with them. That was 5.
And that's just off the top of my head.
That's what I mean.
I've seen great wrestling matches. I've been to great wrestling events and tournaments, but in terms of a story, I don't know.
I think that's guess what? I think I'm pretty good as a storyteller. And I can hear traditionalists rolling their eyes because I've never taken a bump. Actually took one from Bruce Pritchard. Thank you, Bruce, for Providence, Rhode Island. I think experimenting is good. And the Young Bucks are experimenting. And those guys, they don't ever have to go to WWE. They don't. Because they have figured out how to make money on their characters. And that's the key. And you know, I always wonder now, like if I'm a talent, would I want to go to WWE? And the answer is yes, because it's the only place to make money. And our job with the NWA is to recreate a place that you can be a character and figure out a way to make money. Because guess what? There are ways. There's a reason Logan Paul's YouTube videos generate $11,000 a day in pre-roll ad money. Because he creates videos daily with characters and story that draw an audience to watch them daily. There's no reason that a wrestler can't do that. No reason.
Can I play devil's advocate?
Sure.
There is a reason wrestlers can't do that. Websites like mine and the changing of the guard with the internet have made it impossible for wrestlers to maintain kayfabe and be in character and create a situation where a CM Punk can talk someone in the building because they legitimately believe he can beat John Cena for the championship. Because I'm using that Punk thing as an example specifically. What talked people into the building that night was not the fact that CM Punk was wrestling John Cena, but the fact that they believed in their heart of hearts, holy crap, this guy's going to walk out of WWE that night and what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. That's what sold that show.
Yep.
And the fact that it was in his hometown. It had nothing to do with the title. It had nothing to do with WWE. It had nothing to do with who he's in the ring with, although he was in the ring with the right guy. It had to do with what is happening here. Is he leaving? Is he giving the company the middle finger? Is he going to break the fourth wall for real? And what is here that's real?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what when people believe that something is real, they will buy into it. In 2017, how do you make people believe it's real? You talk about Logan Paul. People have no idea what's real and what's not real with Logan Paul. They know what's real and not real with pro wrestling. So that makes it harder for you to create that scenario in comparison to what Logan Paul has accomplished. So how do you do it? Because my argument is that it's harder now to create the reality of the wrestling bubble that we all want to step into, because every wrestling fan wants to believe in their heart of hearts that what they're watching is real. Wrestling was the original reality TV show. Larger-than-life characters that you bought into. I love Flavor of Love. I think it's the greatest reality show that was ever created because it was completely ridiculous and over the top and entertaining, but yet for some reason I was enamored by the week-to-week storytelling of this completely ridiculous situation. Pro wrestling has not created that in a long time. How do you rebuild the bubble when people have popped that bubble so many times?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing, but I think everybody in wrestling has let it happen because they if everything from the ropes out was real, would it be interesting? You know what I mean? What's there? By the way, there's a company making a lot, or was making a lot of money with that formula. It's called the UFC. You know what I mean?
Very true.
Conflict. By the way, if you look yourself in the mirror, we all have these amazing stories. And by the way, when Eddie Guerrero told his story, it was pretty damn good, right? You know what I mean? The redemption and going for the title. Now, can that story work all the time? But guess what? There are so many personal issues in wrestling that never get told because it reveals people for who they really are. I've seen Michael Hayes used to joke about it. He goes, "The real show's right here in the writers' room." Jesus Christ, this is what people want to see. You know what I mean? Like, and is that going to draw money? No, but the reality of the life of these guys and what they feel. You ask a wrestler, "Are you better than that guy?" That's what drives the business, and I think at times it gets to be so convoluted. And look what works in sports. And by the way, this isn't. I don't saying I have the answer, but at least explore why keep doing the same thing over and over again. You know, WWE does a really good job. They do a 3-hour show and they have their format set, and it's not going to change. If I told you I was going to do a 3-hour show that was going to be exactly like Monday Night Raw, you'd say, "Oh, you're doing TNA in 2009 through 2011, right?"
I'd say, well, I honestly, my answer would be, "What the hell is the point of that?"
Exactly. So that's the interesting thing, with Billy's investment in this. He could spend, he put $1.8 million into TNA, and he got it all back. And we could spend a smaller amount doing brand building, character building, and a digital story tense, and do more interesting content than what's being pumped out. Go look at some wrestling content. Tell me what's out there that's interesting. The Young Buck stuff is interesting. There's a lot of great podcasts, but my God, nobody has the time. I mean, 4-hour podcasts. People's time is valuable. We want to create content that is valuable to the audience, the characters, and the narrative story. And I think your reaction on what was the last great independent story to be told, because they're telling too many stories on shows and not building characters. And I think that building characters are so important. And that's the talents I've reached out to. That's how can I take your real life, make a story, and make a character out of it. And I think that's what's going to be intriguing because, yes, I was the enemy. You're a writer. I've heard that more in the last 3 months. He's just a writer. Actually, I'm not. You know what I mean? Like when I was at Ring of Honor, I produced. I made a lot. We went very real with the presentation of that HDNet show. And look what the talents that came off of that. I feel like the time at Impact, we brought a lot of really good characters. I feel like last year in all the chaos if you look at all the characters that got made, from Bobby Lashley to Drew Galloway to Allie to Rosemary to Decay to Mike and Maria to the Hardys to, I mean, there were so many characters that were so fresh in 2016 in TNA, and that was because we focused on characters and stories, and the ratings showed it. If we would have had some money to invest in marketing and really tell strong digital stories, who knows what would have happened. But we were so hamstringed by the chaos of the company that it didn't happen. That's what's interesting is what could be possible at a scalable level like this. And again, I know people are rolling their eyes going, oh, they're saying a lot of nothing. But that's the point, is you have to try this stuff. And here's the thing. It's Billy's company. He can do whatever he wants, and people can think what, and we'll put content out. If you like it, great. If you watch it, great. That's the interesting part. There's no expectations. We don't have to satiate stock investors. I don't have to make an overhead of an office of 60 people and pay an office. That's the interesting part. If you bootstrap a startup like this, which, by the way, every wrestling company starts like this, and if we can rebuild this brand, the most famous, legendary, oldest brand, that's a really interesting story. And by the way, documenting it and letting you be a part of that story, that's interesting. I'm excited by it because there are no rules. I don't have to worry about what segment 6 on my 3-hour show is tomorrow. That's interesting.
If we had to, all right, I got another question before I hit you with that one.
That's fine.
You talk about trying to develop personalities,
yep.
right? You said maybe we'll have 5 people we'll try and develop at the beginning. Tim Storm, we'll use Tim Storm as the example.
Yep.
You're working with Tim Storm, you build him up, you raise his profile.
Mm-hmm.
What fail-safe do you and Billy Corgan have, or the NWA have, that WWE or anyone else are going to come along like a hawk and grab that puppy off the farm and off they go with that baby puppy? What fail-safe do you have building content, building talent, that the second you start to build any inroad, you're not seeing somebody else coming in and encroaching on your farmland? Because look, we're living in a world where WWE financed and resurrected Starrcade to run it the same night as a indie show that draws 2,000 people once a year.
Mm-hmm.
And run it 10 minutes away. We're living in a world where WWE just magically happens to have their touring going exactly where House of Hardcore or Ring of Honor are going 2 months later.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do as you start to look to build things on digital platforms or other platforms, and to protect the Tim Storm from WWE coming and going, here's $1 million. We don't want you to work with Billy Corgan. What do you do?
I think we have the same protections a lot of companies have, but it's almost validation of what we're doing is right. Because you can't stop commerce. If Tim Storm got offered $1 million, damn, take the $1 million. Because
right, but what does that do for the NWA? That means you're just spinning your tires in the mud.
It's not.
How are you building a foundation if they're yanking the people that you're developing?
Well, and that's the business of, yes, there are contracts, and if you build out a business like that, you obviously have some fail safes, but we are planning. Yes, there will be people under contract, and we'll build stories. But that's the point: is we want to build characters and protect. We're not going to be in the protect the IP business the same way everybody else is, and that's the experiment in all this, and that's the interesting part of how you do this. And ultimately there will be loyalty, and guess what? It's still a business. So if somebody wants to go, great, they'll go. And I think that's the challenge in all businesses. And that's what I'm saying is we're going to find a core of 5 people that will be in for the long haul, and you want to commit to it. And if they don't, then the stories will be based around it. I think that's the interesting challenge in all of it. But yes, WWE will always be that way. Guess what? It's been that way since the beginning. And you have to, as a startup, you have to figure out the best way to protect your IP. And that's why we're sticking with branding and the title, because those 2 things aren't going anywhere. And I think that's the interesting part. When Stone Cold Steve Austin went down with an injury, did WWE's business dive?
No.
That's the interesting part, is the brand had gotten so strong that it wasn't tied around one person. So yes, there are challenges. Will talent leave? Yes, always happens. Always happens. And you can only do, you obviously can protect yourself legally with contracts, and you definitely can do that, or you build the brand. And that's what I'm saying is the energy. We haven't talked talent, because the talent isn't, if we get Stone Cold Steve Austin, the company's gonna be made. No, you have to figure out sort of a system, that goes around the talents, and that's what I'm saying. Characters will work, and take a nobody that nobody's ever heard of, you know what I mean, and build them into something. It's almost validation if we build somebody up for 2 years and WWE offers them a very good salary beyond that. But here's the difference: we can create a system that is different than WWE that allows a talent to profit participate in their character moving forward. And that's where we can develop a completely different system that allows a talent to feel incentivized to be part of it, that they would to keep their character when they leave, or they get to profit participate in a better way than they would anywhere else, that will teach them a digital way that allows them to make money. Like right now, if a WWE talent wanted to have a YouTube show, they couldn't. They can't.
Well, look at Zack Ryder. He had one, and they killed it.
That's what I mean. So, like, we want to offer talents freedoms they're not going to get anywhere. And by the way, they can't sign everybody. The market will depend, and some people will want to work hard for a higher upside. And by the way, working at WWE is a great living, but they're on the road a lot. But as trust me, who's the first person to get squeezed when money goes away at WWE?
The wrestlers.
So
it's always the wrestlers.
Yeah. So I mean, because they have to answer to stockholders, and that's the thing is that's why in this scenario that Billy has set up, it's an interesting approach.
Well, let me turn the spotlight on you.
Oh boy.
Same question on you.
Yeah.
You get this thing going. What happens if WWE comes to you and throws a bunch of money in your way? John Gaborik's back in charge at the moment of Impact. You worked very closely with Gaborik. What's stopping Anthem Media from saying, hey, we don't want him to build up the NWA. We want that for ourselves. How do we know? We know Billy's in it for the long haul. Well, why are you in it for the long haul as opposed to building something up? And then what happens if WWE comes back to you and says, "Hey, pal, we'd like you to ride SmackDown again"?
Here's the value of me having worked everywhere. I know what every system is like. You know what? I don't know what this system's like, and Billy and I get to build it together. There's no amount of. Here's the interesting part, and this is more a question you ask yourself almost on a daily basis. Do you do it for money? Yes, you need to pay for stuff. Yes, you need to pay your mortgage and all that stuff. But do you do your work for money, or do you do it for some other unique calling? And I'm in wrestling because it was always something I loved from when I was a kid. I'm sure I could be out making movies, writing things for different stuff on a daily basis that would probably pay me more. But I really love this. And I think people question that almost on a daily basis. Oh, you're just some Hollywood writer. Well, I've been writing and wrestling 15 times longer than I worked in Hollywood because I love wrestling. I actually, when I left college, I was going to try and go work at ECW. My parents said, we just paid all this money for college. You're going to go to Los Angeles and chase that. So I did. But ultimately I came back to wrestling. And weirdly enough, I worked for a different version of ECW that we won't talk about. But for me, like there's not see a scenario of them calling me, and there's not even a number in my head, because the opportunity with this, if Billy and I take this startup company and we go to 200x, it's not even about the money. It's about proving that for all the outsider talk that we've gotten and all the companies we worked at and either left because we didn't agree with the politics, that we were able to make a whole new system from the ground up that hopefully changes the business. Nobody else is offering me that, and I don't think anyone ever will, because the business needs to change. If it keeps going the way it is, it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, because that's how niche it is. Everybody's got an on-demand service. Smaller, smaller, smaller. It's not about getting the largest audience. It's about getting the audience that will pay the most for the smallest amount of content. So,
well, you bring that up. You talk about the on-demand. I talked about this last week on the site. Everyone looks to streaming like it's the new golden goose, just like everybody used to look at pay-per-view. Without disrespecting anybody, I know for a fact there's not one entity out there that is not WWE Network or New Japan World. And I'm putting an asterisk on New Japan World because they have a very unique. They're built and based in a different country, in a different culture. They're not trying to get wrestling fans from the United States as their primary goal. But there is not one iPay-per-view show that has not appeared on one of those two platforms that has drawn 5,000 people who are willing to pay for that event. I don't care what the platform is. I don't care what the wrestling company is. No one has that 5,000. No one has come close to that 5,000 number. So, I mean, that kind of, to me, I kind of know what you're talking about, where it's going to get smaller and smaller. People, when I would go, I'll never forget the first time I went to WCW. It was 1992. It was Halloween Havoc. Sting versus Jake Roberts. Spin the wheel.
Ugh, I was there.
I walked. It was not a great show, but you would have thought with the lineup it might have been.
Yep.
I remember walking into the Philadelphia Civic Center, sitting in the 5th row, and being shocked that a pay-per-view was only half full in this building.
Yep.
Because to me, pay-per-view, big deal. WWF, the Garden, everything sells out. And even when I would go to NWA or WCW Crockett shows, I'm considering WCW a different entity, the house shows would be full at the Nassau Coliseum.
Mm-hmm.
So I was shocked at how empty that building was. I became privy to numbers that Evolve and FIP and other WWN umbrella events had on iPay-per-view prior to the Flow Slam thing that blew up in everybody's face a couple of weeks ago. And I was shocked at how small those numbers were, especially Evolve in 2016, which was averaging around 1,100 or 1,300 buys a show. And that was with WWE plugging them on WWE's machine.
Mm-hmm.
So, everything has gotten too small, and I think people are happy. Maybe I'll get 1,112 instead of 1,111, and that makes them satisfied. Where before, if there were 10,000 people going to shows, just house shows.
Yep.
And I mean, it does ring true to what you say about the system needs to change. But, you talk about how there are carnies involved and people using the system in a bad way. There's going to be people who try to carny the system no matter what.
Of course.
Because they're looking for the quick buck instead of thinking, where can I be in 5 years? So how do you build a culture and a system that's about building the next 5 years to hopefully maybe we'll find Valhalla, as opposed to the next finding people who are just like, I just want to get my next paycheck and be on to Indie ABC. How do you find that culture?
You're honest with people. You're direct with people. And it's honestly one of the reasons I was attracted to the opportunity with Billy, because, Billy and I have known each other for many years. Like I can't even remember the first time we met or talked, but we've been wrestling buddies. He's my wrestling friend, Billy, and then I meet people like, oh, I love the Smashing Pumpkins. I mean, it's my wrestling buddy, Billy. I talk wrestling with him, and we'll talk creative and stuff, but he's very direct and honest, and in a business full of people that spend more of their time working somebody at $10 now than the potential to make $1 million 5 years from now. He's very direct and honest, and it's almost off-putting to the brother carny culture. So you're honest with people, and that was the part in September of last year, as the Game of Thrones, as he calls it, was being played. It was interesting to see those who were willing, if you were honest with them, and some that I still talk to almost on a weekly or daily basis, because we're clear about what we thought was going to happen, and guess what? It happened. If you look at, I'll use a small divergence. If you look at where everybody was 1 year ago today to where they are now that was in that story, it's vastly different, and a lot of them are not in a better position, because they were worried about the $5 now instead of the $5 million 5 years from now. So, I've had very clear discussions with everybody about what we're trying to build. And it does sound quite ethereal. And I don't have a blueprint that I can point to, oh, we're going to do this, this, and this, because it hasn't been built yet. And that's why I don't know if I mentioned this already. I don't know if you saw the story that Elon Musk came out today with this idea that he has to have a rocket that can get you from New York to London in 32 minutes at the same cost of a coach airline ticket.
Sounds pretty damn cool on paper.
So that's the thing. He's talking about it, but guess what? He's a smart guy, and he's proven it with all of his businesses. And I'd rather take inspiration from someone like that than someone who's going to tell you they're going to get a national cable deal and bring a company back to glory. I can't tell you that this is going to be the ultimate experiment in story, but as Billy told me, he goes, this is going to be the greatest chance that we have to tell the best possible story in wrestling, because all the other systems are closed. They're all closed systems. The path of WWE forever is already figured out. The line of succession is figured out. The same on all the other companies. The Wild West is the only way for us to go at this point. And those who want to come along, great. And those who want to chase a cheap buck or want to take the safe road, that's cool. And that's the decision everybody has. So being honest is actually the best way, and being transparent is being the best way. And guess what? It may not attract all the same people in wrestling, but that's the best part of this culture and where we're going is even as fake as people are on social media, it actually ends up the reality comes out eventually. And what if you're actually honest with people and transparent from the beginning? Where does that take you? And that's an interesting ride to go on.
It almost sounds like you're building the Android to WWE's Apple.
Well, it's and by the way, why are those successful? When you go the opposite, because you don't need a direct copy of something else. You know what I mean? You don't. And I think the best stuff we did at Impact was when we went the other way. You know, like if we instead of having girl stories that were about A, we went and did B. Or, you know, take a guy like Bobby Lashley and made him as real as possible. Finding those nuances. I mean, Christ, the Hardy stuff that people still are arguing over. Like, it was the complete opposite. And remember that first day that people saw Matt Hardy playing the piano and his brother, everybody hated it. But then they were like,
that is true.
And you don't know nobody knows what they like until they see it. And that's the fun part, because if someone said, like, if Vince McMahon would have looked at that Hardy thing on paper and, ugh, this is terrible, don't do that. But until you try, that's the thing. We're going to try instead of just going, well, no, we're going to do it the old way. And I don't want to do it the old way. I've done it the old way. I'm the enemy. You said it yourself. I'm going to do it the new way. So I will go with it's the Galloway thing. We're going to go out with this camera and we're going to figure out what it is. And that film could have been cut 7 different ways. And the story was dictated by the circumstance. That's the fun part.
Well, let me ask you this, because a lot of people have listened to this and have heard all of these talks about culture and changes and experimentation. We talk a lot about stories.
Yep.
When are people actually going to start seeing these stories?
Sure.
When can people start to expect to see something under the NWA branding produced by Corgan and Lagana, whether it's a documentary or YouTube content or Dancing Bears or whatever? When do we have an idea of when some of this content will be produced and when it will start to appear before potential consumers' eyes?
This Saturday. You know, the first part is on Dave Marquez's show. And we'll be, you know, and that's part of the agreement. We're going to start to tell this story with Tim Storm through Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, plus other stuff that goes around it. Plus, as the narrative unfolds, and that's the best part, because there's no expectation. I don't have to have a 2-hour show on Thursday night. I just have to continually provide a story that's consistent and stuff. So it started now. This interview now. That's the interesting part. That's why being transparent and laying out. Here's the thing. Everything I've talked about, we've talked about for 8 months. You know, Billy and I did it. It was like you said, it was like almost groundwork for it. And like it's interesting to see like that nobody is adapting. If they're doing it the old way. We're gonna do this, that, and the other thing. Yes, Billy and I would like to do a studio wrestling show because guess what? It fits the brand. What's one of the most famous NWA things ever? 605.
I was gonna say Ricky Steamboat coming out and challenging Flair in the studio.
The Techwood Studios, the 605 show. The studio wrestling show, by the way, that's what Raw is. It's just in a giant arena. I don't want to do a giant arena because, one, that is a much larger scale business. The studio wrestling show dates back to when? The 40s. You know what I mean? What wrestling company was on television first? The NWA.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is if there was a studio wrestling show on for free on every possible platform consistently, weekly, people would watch it because we would program it. Like you said, Ricky Steamboat walks out. Interesting things, because if we could do it live, that's an interesting proposition. That's really interesting. You know, go back to 2002 when TNA did the pay-per-views, the weekly pay-per-views. Imagine if the internet could have supported that as a free show. And again, how do you pay for it? Let's put that aside for half a second. If those shows would have aired for free on the internet on Wednesday nights, Think about where that brand would have been built. If somebody was said, well, we're gonna spend $3 million over this first year to do these weekly shows that brings wrestling back to an audience where they are, what would that be worth? And that's what's interesting is how do you generate a product that people want to see? There's a lot of wrestling shows that are behind paywalls, but what if there's something you really want to see that you don't have to pay for?
So let me close out with this question.
Sure.
And I know it's the chicken and the egg. Let's
Sure.
say you do a consistent series on YouTube or live. Where do you make money? Where do you make money off of that?
Sure.
How do you do that? Are we talking product placement? Are we talking sponsorship?
Oh.
Are we talking Billy Corgan buys out ads on every potential advertising revenue, every potential advertising corner to promote Smashing Pumpkins? So the snake is feeding itself. I mean, how do you take something, put it out there on these platforms, and make money?
Sure.
If you don't make money, Billy's just throwing money down a hole, and maybe he wants to do that. Maybe he's looking at it like, I love wrestling, I don't care. I can go toward the Pumpkins and take some of this money and have fun with wrestling, and really just recharge my batteries to go back and be a musician. If that's the strategy, even in the back of his head, I can respect that, because how do I not respect people like Carrie Silkin and Todd Gordon, who took something that they loved and spent money on it to try and build something? But Billy did that just because he's a rock star. It's still the same concept. But how do you make money with all these things that you're talking about? Because if you're not making money, really, what's the point?
Of course. And I think what's the biggest attraction this past year? What made the most money possible?
The WrestleMania brand name.
No.
Oh, Conor McGregor against Floyd Mayweather.
When did they ask for your money?
The night of the show.
Everything else was free and available and told a very consistent story. I'm not saying we're going to do a $500 million pay-per-view, but what is the flow of wrestling content? Something to get you interested, and eventually a purchase. That's that it will. By the way, that's in music. Now it's funny. Now before, and we use a music analogy, you used to sell the album, and the concert was the ancillary. It's now reversed. Now the music is basically free and streaming, and the money is in the concert. By the way, so if we brand build, and the idea you get it to be a very interesting product, and then you take it on the road, that's where you make money. You know what I mean? If you build an attraction that people want to go see, that they've enjoyed in their, it become part of their lives, it's the same as any business. And I think that's where it's broken is WWE now has television, all this stuff, a network. The live event experience is gone. House shows are not the same thing. That's build an attraction that people want to pay to go see. That's how you make money. You build it in T-shirts. As you build the brand, it becomes something that people want to represent. NWA T-shirts will sell, but you have to get an audience to sell them to. I can't just put T-shirts on sale tomorrow and sell to a tiny fractionate audience. We have to build it. And guess what? This is everybody's company. It's not just the 57-year-old. We need to build it out to a much larger audience, and you need as many eyeballs, and then it becomes a thing. So yeah, trust me, I know the monetization. Well, how are you going to pay for it? How's this? We're going to make very smart decisions as we build out this content. No one's going to make $1 million a year one in this company. It's not. And if you don't want to come along on the ride, cool. We'll find people. And that's the interesting part is because there's no expectation. And as we grow it, great, we need a name. Great, this is the deal we'll make. That's the fun part of all this. There's no rule book. And I think that's the most interesting part.
Well, as you and Captain Ahab go chase the great white whale,
yep.
I wish you nothing but the best personally. I hope this works out, because if it does, it's better for the wrestling business. And I am emotionally attached to the wrestling business in many ways. I am tethered to it. And I will say this. When you guys run your first studio show, I will be there, and I look forward to covering it.
That'd be awesome.
Where it is. Hopefully it's not in New York, because then I'll have an excuse to go travel somewhere. But if it's in New York, great. But my final question for you is this. Today or yesterday begins a new chapter in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Compare that new chapter today, this week, to the day you started working for WWE and the day you started working for Impact.
It's funny because almost exactly the same because there was so much unknown. So like when I went to work at WWE, I was 26 years old. I had worked in very traditional television, and my entire world changed overnight because it was a completely different environment. And I had a lot to learn about a completely different universe, pun intended, as far as how to tell stories there. And I look back at my 6 years at WWE as something very good. Nobody bats 1,000, but I was very happy with my 6 years. Fast forward to my move to Nashville in 2011. I had no idea. I was going to work on an Indian wrestling show and All Wheels Wrestling. I had no idea that I would be entering into a legitimate roller coaster ride of business lessons that go behind what you saw on television that ultimately, too, creatively would have a lot of interesting things along with a lot of drama that I wasn't expecting. And it was a roller coaster ride I didn't see coming. Comparing it to today, exactly the same. And guess what? That's the best part. If I knew exactly how this was going to go, then it would be boring. I have no idea what's going to happen. And here's the craziest part. In the 3 months since this got announced, it's been insane in a way that I wish that everyone could have come along on the ride. And maybe that's just the show. Maybe that's just what you'll see is the insanity of what really goes on here. And, because it is unlike any business you'll see. And it's actually one of the more flexible businesses that I've ever seen or worked in because it's so personality driven. And in 1 minute, everything can change. In one tweet or one information dropping, the entire business pivots super hard. And like, it's now how you react to it. And that's the interesting part of where we're going. It's a brand new day. And I hate that term, but as far as like, we used to say to TNA, it's a new day. Well, there was like 100 restarts. This company is going to be singular vision of brand building and building around that world title. And you and I will talk in 15 years, and that will be the singular vision of a strong world champion and those 3 letters and what they mean. That's the vision. And if you start simply like that and you just grow around it, that's what's going to be.
Well, we wish you the best, and I have one request.
Oh, boy.
When you book those shows, the first studio shows, I expect to see the Mulkeys and George South doing jobs.
I wonder if their kids could do jobs. Are there Mulkey
George South Jr. is a wrestler.
Are there Mulkey kids?
I don't know that there may be Mulkey kids. I don't know if there's Mulkey kids in the business, but there is a George South Jr. and George South Sr. is still wrestling on a regular basis.
I'm sure he is. Gotta get that payday, brother.
He's got the payday. He's got the book. He's good to go. There's your story right there.
Booked.
And he's already got a YouTube series.
Good. That's great. I hope people are watching it.
Well, perhaps he is. And hopefully very soon we'll be watching a lot of content under the National Wrestling Alliance banner. And I don't want to make any predictions other than to say I don't think we'll see Dixie Carter on any of it. So
but what if you did? I'm kidding.
And the business pivots with one tweet. It's like Luger coming out on Nitro. So I want to thank you so much for your time. I know it's a busy week for you. Before you go, you can follow Dave at Lagana on Twitter and other platforms. Before we go, if you have any final words to everybody who's been listening to this, who holds high hopes for the potential of the NWA brand, who hopes it's going to be shepherded and nurtured in a way that it hasn't been in a long time, or to even the naysayers who are thinking it's just more bullshit that's being thrown at them that's going to be a waste of their time to invest in emotionally. By all means, say what you got to say, and I want to let you close this out.
Yeah, I mean, come along for the ride. And here's the thing, again, I'm not asking you for anything other than the time on the content we give you. So I don't have to give you 2 hours. If I put up a 5-minute video, you like it, great, tell me. If you don't, tell me. And that's the thing. And that's the best part of this idea is it's going to be always shifting, and it's just unique. And again, I see eyes rolling if they've made it this far. It's going to be really an adventure of that you haven't seen before. And that's the interesting part is I have no idea where it's going to go. And I think that's the best part. You know what I mean? Because if it doesn't change, close your eyes and picture the next 15 years of the wrestling business as it is now. It's not going to change much. I don't think, unless somebody actually makes it change, because you have a publicly traded company and you have everybody else chasing it. So how do you do something different? That's what we're trying to figure
And
out.
the last time it changed in a major way was when Eric Bischoff blew it.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, technology changes everything. And the rise of, think about, people don't pay attention to this fact that in the mid 90s, there was not as much content in the world. The reason that Raw and Nitro were so successful was because there wasn't a lot of new programming on cable television. There really wasn't. There were sports and there was some, but I mean, the explosion of cable television in the 2000s changed a lot of stuff for television. And by the way, the wrestling boom in the 80s changed because of cable and all that stuff. And here we are sitting in 2018 with this, the fact that you and I could be streaming this conversation live to an audience and it wouldn't be behind your paywall is an interesting dichotomy. You know what I mean? Like, is the interesting audience expectation of when they watch it, how they watch it. Is live still important? Is it communal viewing? Is it this? Is it that? That's the interesting part in this, is because nobody's got it figured out. ESPN doesn't have it figured out, so why should I? So I'd rather try and figure out how we can make it work for this industry.
Well, we look forward to seeing you try and beat life at the game of Tetris through the prism of pro wrestling. And we look forward to seeing what the National Wrestling Alliance under Billy Corgan's ownership will feature. And we'll be covering the story in the days, weeks, and hopefully months and years to come. And thank you so much for being so gracious with your time. And I want to thank everybody for listening. And it's a new day for the NWA. I heard that. New era. A reset, a reboot. Don't call it a comeback. Maybe a new trilogy. But the NWA, as it existed, no longer does. What it will be going forward, none of us know what it will be. Not even Billy Corgan and Dave Lagana. They're just the ones who are now steering the ship, and we'll see where it goes as we follow its trajectory. So we'll do that in the future here on PW Insider, and we thank all of you for your support of PWInsiderElite.com. Until next time, for Dave Lagana, I'm Mike Johnson, and Dave, I want to thank you again for sitting in with us. Thank you so much.